Welcome back, Unity developers. This is James, and as promised in the previous part, today's video will be about checkpoints in the game and moving your player from place to place. So in the last episode, we created the spawn point as well as the kill box or death zone for our players to fall down the holes and respawn. And we reset our camera to follow the new player. I learned a new trick myself, because learning is important, about how we can point out things so that you can see them in the scene window, and you don't see them in this game window, but you can actually see where they are. So we're going to do this on the death zone to start. It's just a quick thing before we get into the tutorial part. I'm going to go over here to the little down arrow of the death zone cube, and I'm going to go ahead and select gray, and you can see it puts the name right here and shows up so we can tell where it is. And we're going to do the same thing with a spawn point. We're going to go ahead and select that, do the drop down, and turn that green. Okay, so now we have the spawn point, we know where it is. Okay, so now let's get into making checkpoints. First thing we're going to do is create a game object, create other, and cube. So this cube is going to act as a trigger, if you will. So when the player enters a certain area, a checkpoint area, so to speak, we're going to move the spawn point to that area so that the player then spawns there rather than back at the beginning of the map, because the number one thing I hated about Mario Brothers was getting to the very last Goomba and dying and having to go and restart the entire level. And games back in that day were extremely difficult, and we don't want to do that. So we've got our cube. We're going to go ahead and stretch it out on the Z by setting that to 20. We're going to stretch it out on the Y by setting it to 30. Actually, it's a bit tall. Let's go ahead and just make it 15. And the X we are going to set to 5. I'm going to move this up into position so it covers a good amount of area, and we can actually use the scale tool in here to get it so it fills in. And that's good. We can shut off the mesh render because we don't want to be able to see it. Okay, so now we have our cube. We're going to rename this cube checkpoint, and we can turn on, since it doesn't have anything we can see, we're going to go ahead and make this orange with that little arrow there. So now we know where our checkpoint is. Okay, now the checkpoint needs a script to move the spawn point, so let's go ahead and do that because we love scripting. We're going to go to our scripts folder, create JavaScript, and we're going to name this one checkpoint because it's going on our checkpoint object. We're going to press open so it pops up in our MonoDevelop, and here we go. We're not going to need the function start or update, so we can delete those. We are going to need to know what our spawn point is, so let's create a variable spawn point, and that is a transform with a capital T. Okay, then we're going to use the trigger enter function just like we did for the death zone. So we're going to say function on trigger enter. Okay, and we need to know what ran into the trigger. So we're going to say other collider. Okay, so this other stuff tells us what entered our trigger, what fell into the trigger, okay? Or what has entered the zone. So we need to make sure that that's the player and not the enemy, because if an enemy enters there and we move the checkpoint, that's not the point. We want it to be where the player's progress is, not where the enemies are. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if other dot tag, and we'll get to that in a second, is equal to, that's two equals, player, then we want to go ahead and move the spawn point. Okay, so what we're going to do is say spawn point dot position is equal to a new vector 3. And what a vector 3 is, vector math is kind of hard to explain in a short tutorial, so what I'm just going to say is that this represents the x, y, and z position of an object. Okay, and the reason we're not just setting it to the collider's position is because the collider is not aligned in the sandwich at the same point as the spawn point. It's not in the right position to play our game. So we're going to say we want it to be at a new x. So we're going to say transform dot position dot x. We want the y to be the same as the spawn point's original vertical height or y position. So we're going to say spawn point dot position dot y. And we want the z to be the same for the spawn point as well. So again, we say spawn point dot position dot z. And we close that, our parentheses and our semicolon at the end there. Now once we've entered the trigger, or the checkpoint, we no longer have use for it, and it's going to clutter up our game. Okay? So what we need to do is go ahead and remove it. So we're going to say destroy game object with a lowercase g. And that will destroy our checkpoint, not our spawn point. Okay, so we're going to save this script. And there's one thing we need to do before this will work. You see here we've checked the tag of the object is entering. So in the Unity window, while it's compiling, I'm going to go over what tags are. On our first person controller, you can see it has a tag. It's untagged, right? So if we play the game and I come in here, you won't see the spawn point move. But when our player dies, you'll notice his name is, oh, I forgot one more thing, apparently. The checkpoint needs to be set to on trigger, okay? So let me just go over tags without the demonstration. What's going to happen when our player dies is it's going to spawn our preset player, okay? But because this player is not the original object, its name will actually show up as player parentheses clone, okay? So we can't check the name of our player because the first time we play it's first person controller, the second time it's player slash clone. So we use tags instead. They're basically names except they don't change. Okay, so our first person controller right now is untagged. So we're just going to switch that to player. Okay, and then we need to do the same thing to our prefab. So in our assets folder, go to our player prefab and drop that down and set that as player. So when it enters the checkpoint, it's going to grab our game player object and it's going to say, what's your tag? You know, what's your password? And the password is the word player. But because our first person controller is tagged with the word player, that's his password. He's going to say, oh, the password's player. And the checkpoint's going to be like, okay, you checked out. You can come into the nightclub. You're cool. And it's going to move the spawn point for us. Okay? So if we play the game, you're going to see me enter the checkpoint, and then the spawn point's going to jump right over here underneath it. Okay? So if I come over here and it doesn't jump. Give me a second here. I got to figure out what's going on. Check the script. Other tag equals player. Hang on a second. Okay, I'm back. I figured out what I did wrong. The checkpoint isn't going to work unless we attach the checkpoint script. Yeah, I'm not thinking too smoothly today, so we drag and drop the checkpoint on here, and then we have to assign the spawn point. Okay, so we're going to grab the spawn point and move it over there with a little drag and drop. Now if we play the game, you'll see the spawn point move, at least hopefully, because if it doesn't work, I'm going to be mad. Okay, so we enter the checkpoint and the spawn point moves, and then the checkpoint is destroyed. Now if we fall into the death zone, we'll be respawned here at the new spawn point rather than back at the beginning of the game. So we can actually create, now that we have these checkpoints pre-made, we've made one good one, we can actually duplicate these and move one across. Let's say the player's having an extremely difficult time jumping over this hole or making it across this platform. We can actually move another checkpoint over here so that the next time they spawn, let's say there's some enemies over here and they die, they respawn here and they don't have to face that obstacle again. Okay, so we're going to play this to make sure that two checkpoints actually work. And it should, because the first one gets destroyed. Okay, so you can see our player has the first person controller name. We enter, it recognizes the tag as player, so the password's good, and then we fall in the hole and die, we respawn. You can see our player has respawned with the name player clone. Okay, so he's got a different name than the first time. But because the tag is the same, as soon as we enter this, the spawn point moves and the checkpoint disappears. Now if I fall in the hole, I'm going to respawn on this side of the platform. So I don't have to deal with that obstacle if I don't want to. So that's the checkpoint system and how it works. And you can create as many of these checkpoints as you want. So let's play the game, and I'm running through here, and there's my spawn point, and there's my new one. So I've made it over that obstacle, and I've faced the baddies, and I've shot the bad guys, and I've beaten the boss, and now I move on to the next checkpoint, and I don't have to go backwards and deal with it. I can if I want to, but if I die, I'll respawn at my current game progress. Okay? If you choose, you can actually leave these checkpoints alive just by putting 2 slashes here, commenting that out. So then your player, if you're playing a 2D game, let's say an RPG, you have the player go kill the dragon, and then he has to come back to the king and return the heart of the bloody dragon with its sword through it. The checkpoint will move the spawn point. Let's say I beat the platform and I make it out of the dungeon. Okay, now I'm fighting the dragon and I kill the dragon off, or I'm fighting the dragon and I die. I respawn, I fight the dragon some more. Now I need to go back to the king. So I get on the platform and I'm going back to see the king, and I get beat up, or I get into village. This is a horrible metaphor. I'm in the village and I get beat up by a bunch of chickens, and then the chickens kill me. I respawn in the village, not back where the dragon is. So if you're building a game that has progress where you need to go backwards, leave the checkpoints on, don't destroy them. If you're making a linear game, or a game where you only travel in one direction and should never need to go back to any of the other levels, you can go ahead and destroy them. You can just have those game objects destroy themselves, and everything will be fine. And by doing it this way, we are saving on assets because we're destroying them. We have one single spawn point. We don't have to worry about players spawning randomly all over the place and stuff like that. So if I make it there, and then I die, I respawn. So that's the checkpoint system, and like all the other scripts and assets, this one will be on my blog for you guys to go ahead and just copy and download. There aren't any visual assets, so it's really just that one checkpoint script, and remembering to tag your players, but I'll put a reminder in the blog as well, and I will link to all of that in the description of the video. In the next video, we're going to start talking about enemies. It's a big deal. It might take more than one video to get done, but we're going to go ahead and give it a try. We're going to make some enemies that move through the world, and I think we're going to start out with just enemies that run around, like Mario Goomba style, or the turtles, and then we'll move on into shooting or animated enemies that attack you.